Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hey, dear radical. How are you? I hope you're doing fine. Today, we're in for a great ride with Sarah Harry, the co-founder of the Body Positive Australia, a psychotherapist, yogi, and author of Fat Yoga. I can't wait to bring you our conversation. And before I do, there's two important things. Let's start with gratitude and save the rant for after that, shall we? Lovely ones, most of you know that I have a Patreon page, which is a site where people can support projects like this. And it's true that without your support, I wouldn't be able to keep this work up, because I do invest hours and hours of my free time into this, and I'm not making any money with this. I'm not offering any coaching or anything. And yes, I do think this is important work, and I do love doing it, as you know, but the sheer amount of money and energy that goes into it would be unsustainable for me without your support. So with a little help from you, lovely radicals, I hope to make this show fully listener funded so that I don't burn out or go bankrupt. And anyway, want to know who the champs are of the week? The champs of the week are Kay and Amanda. Kay and Amanda have joined my Patreon tribe, and I want to tell the world right here, right now, how happy your support makes me, Kay and Amanda. Thank you so much for your pledges. And if you, dear listener, find this show worthy of support, then please go have a look at my page on patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. That's patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. You can pledge and cancel anytime, of course. And thank you in advance. Your help is much appreciated. And now, sit tight. Hold on to your seat and let me go on a very necessary rant, one that's intended to keep our sanity in this crazy world. We've talked a lot about all the ridiculous messages that we are exposed to in today's culture, and about the fact that some of those come insidiously packaged so that at first glance they might sound reasonable. And suddenly we find ourselves doubting whether or not we might be barking up the wrong tree here by starting to trust our bodies again. And of course, that sounds crazy when I say it like this. But we have to acknowledge that diet culture and all its lieutenants, the companies and schemes and programs and products, those aren't slow on the uptake either. Those marketing people are hired to sell. So now that more and more evidence comes out how harmful dieting is, the more they develop an entirely new narrative about their products. It was almost easier back when they were honest and called a spade, but now we often have to be really careful not to underestimate the fact that ads do have an effect on our subconscious mind. Messages do seep in. And we have to really make an effort to think critically if we want to protect our well-being. And you know what we're all exposed to every day, all the cleanses and detoxes and beach body bullshit. And also, generally, it doesn't just apply to diet and weight loss companies and the such, but of course to everything. It never ceases to amaze me what I really see when I make an effort to really examine what is being presented. In so many cases, I find that first I see just another ad for any product. And once I study what the ad is really saying, and only when I ask myself whether or not the message really makes sense, oh boy, amazing what's legal. You can literally tell people that if they buy a certain, let's say, a cell phone billing plan, then you'll never be lonely again. Yeah, seen it, by the way. Or that with a new car, you'll know what love feels like. Or that you're gonna make your tummy smile by eating a certain food. Amazing. It's all out there. And I mean, those are the obvious examples, and let's look at it for what it is. Those are lies. They sound nice, but that doesn't make them any more true. And the message behind the message is almost always that you are to blame. If you're not feeling love, if your tummy isn't smiling, or if you feel lonely. Because that's the hidden message. And that's the stuff that gets to our soul. We might not notice, but as we know from the extensive research on how the human psyche works, it really does affect us. And it affects us very negatively. Because when we feel like there's something that needs to be fixed with us, we are so much more likely to buy anything. It's basic knowledge for everyone who's working in the marketing and advertisement industry, and it's important for you as a consumer to keep that in mind. It is a game, a very clever game. It's how consumerism works. And we have to make sure that our internal bullshit detector is on when all these ads and messages on social media come flooding in, because they do constantly. And it's not about not ever buying a new gadget again, of course, that's not the point. It's up to everyone to decide what they want to spend their money on. All I'm advocating for is to be your own best friend and ask yourself first, do I really want to buy that hair dye because I love the color? Or do I want to buy it also because there's this deep belief that unless I have the latest style, or unless I do everything to appear younger by not letting any gray hair show, or because unless I make all the effort I can to look more presentable, that unless I do all of these things, I'm not quite as lovable, or I might risk rejection. You know, it can be painful, of course, to become aware what beliefs we're holding on to, but it's also very healing to dig them up, because mostly they're hidden away someplace and we just go about our day and buy the stuff that we do just because we've always done so, right? Or because our mothers and friends do so. And I think it's worth the time to just think about, why am I doing this? Why do I think I need this product? Why do I really think I need to lose weight? Why is it not okay the way it is? What is wrong here? You know, and then make a choice. Because usually it is not about the, let's say, the hair dye. It's about everything. And that includes all the insidious messages and articles that cross our feed on this daily basis, suggesting that cutting out a certain food group or subscribing to a certain dietary tribe, or that a certain type of exercise could make us happier, healthier, or, you know, having a flatter stomach. Whatever it is, what it's mostly about is do this or buy this and be more lovable. Right? It's hard to stay true to yourself and your own body signals and to learn to trust it again when the whole world is constantly trying to steer you off course by making you believe that you're not lovable if you do trust your body, and if you don't buy just every product because it's on sale and because someone says that, you know, not having gray hair makes you more lovable. It's hard to develop your own opinion, but damn, it feels good. And I realized that I went on a bit of a tangent here, but it's really important to let you know that only you are the captain of your thinking. And it is really, really important to think critically nowadays, because there's just so much misinformation coming at us, and we need to be able to be aware enough to, detect the bullshit. And why I'm saying all this is because I almost threw a fit, because someone sent me an article that went into how some well-known vegan bloggers apparently were coming out and saying that periods, menstrual cycles, are toxic. Toxic, ladies and gentlemen. One of the most basic functionings of a female body. In the article, they reported that one of the most prominent of those bloggers stated that after months of veganism, she stopped having a period. So now, in order to hide her own dysfunctional relationship to food and exercise, and therefore suffering from hypothalamic amenorrhea, the lack of periods, she came up with a convenient narrative. Hey, periods are toxic anyway. Who needs them? When we know that what is making periods disappear is when there is not enough energy for the body to tend to the reproductive system. The lack of period, often totally masked by women being on the birth control pill, by the way, that only produces a withdrawal bleed that makes most women think that they are having a menstrual cycle. But mostly what produces a lack of period is when women exercise too much and don't eat enough to fuel their energy expenditure. And isn't that basically what we are being told to do in this diet crazy world? And we really have to wake up here, because while it might be true that having a period can sometimes be inconvenient, it is downright insane to make impressionable people believe that not having a period is nothing to worry about, or even, for God's sake, that periods are toxic. The level of fuckery here is staggering. Those are grown people who, with their large following, actively contribute to the normalization and even glorification of disordered eating. Not having a period is a serious issue, not, as those bloggers are trying to tell young people, a sign of health. As I said, periods are mostly lost to a restrictive way of eating and an overexpenditure of energy. Read over-exercising, which of course a person does to lose weight, to be leaner, to be skinnier. And the ramifications of not having a period are by no means negligible. When the body is in such a state of stress, it doesn't produce the most basic hormones. And that has a direct, very negative impact on your bones, your heart, your sleep, your skin, your hair, your nightly peeing, your digestion, your energy, your overall energy, your libido, your anxiety levels, and your mood. Brittle bones and a weakened heart are not to be wished on anyone. And what those bloggers are doing is extremely dangerous and disordered. And it shows amazing ignorance, denial, and a complete lack of proper education to go out and say such a stupid thing. That's all I wanted to say about this today. And as you can say, stuff like that really makes me want to scream. Because this shouldn't even have to be something we talk about. But apparently we have to fight madness on a daily basis these days. And yes, that was an angry rant, but for heaven's sake, I really just can't with this. And I want to protect people from unnecessary suffering. So, now on to the good stuff. And I really have a good cure for, all the insanity that we've just heard about. Because in today's episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast, I get to talk to Sarah Harry from Melbourne. Sarah is a psychotherapist, as I said, a yoga teacher, a researcher, a writer, and a university lecturer. As a leading body image and eating disorder specialist and experienced clinician, she has a refreshing perspective on bodies, weight, movement, and inclusivity. Sarah was the first yogi in Australia to offer yoga for bigger bodies. She has practiced yoga for more than 20 years, and as the owner and founder of Fat Yoga, she runs specialist classes and retreats. She is also the co-director of Body Positive Australia alongside Fiona Sutherland, the glorious lady whom I interviewed in episode 28. And I warmly suggest to you that you listen to the episode. But back to Sarah. Sarah is a member of the Yoga and Body Image Coalition USA, sits on the National Advisory Board of Health at Every Size Australia, and she is a member of the National Eating Disorders Coalition. After we talked about how wonderful her partner Fiona Sutherland is, because I really had a blast with Fiona in the episode that I mentioned, episode 28, and how great it is for just both of them to have worked together for so long. I then asked Sarah to share her side of that story and how she and Fiona met and how the Body Positive Australia came into existence.
Okay, so Fiona and I met probably 13, maybe 14 years ago, where I went to work at an eating disorder clinic where she already worked. And it's quite a good story in the sense that I lasted 3 weeks working there because we had a bit of a miscommunication about how much money they were going to pay me. I thought they said 70 and they actually said $17 an hour. But the wonderful thing was that I met the beautiful Fiona and we had this conversation one day which sort of went like, I was talking about doing some group therapy with people with binge eating disorder because at that time there was no services in Melbourne at all or Australia really. And she's like, we should really do that. And then from there it took us about a year because we were young back then. It took us a year of planning to put together what we call RIPE, which is Recovery as Possible for Everybody. And then we've been running Recovery as Possible for Everyone groups, so bulimia and binge eating recovery groups for about 12 years, I think, every single Saturday morning for 12 years. And people have just kept coming and it's always been amazing. The efficacy of the program, but really our work then just expanded from there. So we started Body Positive when we started doing that. We did change the name a couple of years later. Of course, now there becomes the question for us about the name Body Positive and what it means, right now in the body positive world. But we've had that name for a long time, so it's hard for us because it's kind of morphed into something else. But we do a lot of stuff together now, as well as having individual projects, because Fiona is the mindful dietitian and I run Fat Yoga. So, we do different things, but we come together every week and work together, which is wonderful.
What do you find concerning about the current state of the body positive movement in general and what it morphs into or seems to morph into?
Look, I guess the problem with the body positivity at the moment is it has been a little co-opted or a lot co-opted. By brands and even diet culture. I saw something recently where Weight Watchers are starting to use those types of words and that's not even surprising now. I'm seeing it everywhere, using body positivity to sell people things and, to me that's part of diet culture, which means it's not helpful or useful for anybody. and so it worries and concerns me. But I think when I talk to people both in the fat activist community and in the body positive community, there's still a sense that, we shouldn't rush out and change our name, that people still understand in the general public, which are the people we're really working with. We're working with real people with real body image issues and who are really struggling. So not necessarily people that understand the nuances of the word itself and how it is changing. So while real people that we want to help still understand it as a positive thing, then we'll continue to use it.
What I ask myself is how can we catch those people who might never have heard of body positivity and then they get the message from someone that's not really a person, but you know what I mean, Weight Watchers, something like Weight Watchers, or some groups that claim to be body positive when really they are basically steeped in diet culture and promoting weight loss under the guise of this is body positive because we are taking care of ourselves and all that crap, which It sounds demeaning to call it crap because I understand where they are coming from. Of course I do. But how can we help people that might be reached by the original message, but that now don't get reached because they get sidetracked into some eluded version of body positivity?
It's a wonderful question, how to reach those people that may be vulnerable to the messages that the advertisers are pushing and co-opting in terms of diet culture. And I think it is about the people that work in this space and have worked in this space for a long time, and also the new and wonderful and creative people coming up and through to continue to have a voice, to continue to speak out and write articles and be loud and be activists. Both Fiona and I are activists in very different ways, because I live in a fat body. I'm a fat activist and she's a fat ally for sure, but she also is a huge activist in this area and in the area of health at every size. So I think we can use our activism just to keep pushing back, and I see a lot, I read a lot. What does happen though is we don't have the budgets and
to run advertisement campaigns like they do.
We're never going to have that money, which is why Fiona and I made quite a controversial decision to work with a big brand because they did have money and see if I could make their campaign as good as it could be in terms of representation. So where we came from when we decided to work with a big brand on this stuff was we don't have the money to do it. But if we get together, if it's us and it's not some dodgy, weight-focused, half-qualified person, I don't really have anyone in mind, but you know who I mean, who sells maybe bikini diets on the internet. If it's us instead of them advising these companies and helping them use representation, for example. So the ad that comes out of that has different size bodies, different age bodies, people of disability, people of colour, and people of different sexualities. So for me, that was a win, although it was a controversial move to do that, to kind of work with the system rather than against the system.
I love the idea, what you did, because I find if everybody stays stiff and behind a wall and just shouts their ideas, then what ends up happening is millions of different echo chambers where the same messages get repeated, but no one listens to another echo chamber, and people tend to not listen to each other and just react very defensively or even contemptuous or demeaning. And what ends up happening is non-communication, and then the fat activists hate the other people that want to promote weight loss, and then no one talks to each other, and we're not getting anywhere, even though I believe it's very important to create a foundation where we can go back to and recharge, but we have to step into the arena and talk to the opponent. And I mean talk to the opponent. And we need to be open to where they're coming from, and we have to sort of meet them where they're at. If we just keep shouting at them, then they will shout back, and that will only harden the party lines. You know what I mean?
Well, I really want people to hear my message, and if somebody is going to give me an opportunity to spread that message in a wide way, then I'm going to take it. And it might not be everybody's, people might think, what does that decision mean? But it doesn't have much more meaning other than I want to change how these things are perceived. So for me in Australia right now, my book, which has the word fat in it, is in Target and Kmart. And those are very big corporations, and they've never had or taken a book that even looks or has the word fat in it. So for me, I'm working with those people, and I'm putting that out there in such a huge way because I want to create change. I want to normalize those words. I want those words to lose their stigma. And if the way to do that is to work with your brands in those ways, I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary in terms of, special things with those companies. But the opportunity to have that book have that visibility was so important to me, and actually meant more in some ways than having it published and only a few people read it in small bookshops, because, you know, that's really challenging for people if you've got it in mainstream big shops like that.
Mm-hmm. That's why I said before that we have to try and step out of our bubble and try and approach someone else from another echo chamber and plant a seed, not necessarily convince them of all of our ideas, but rather just planting seeds. And that confronts me head on with my own vulnerability too, because I've recently started to I went into groups that discussed other things like science and history and, you know, just some mixed mental arts. And then I just tried and commented on their articles, which had nothing to do with weight or anything. But of course, somewhere or other, the topics of obesity or weight or exercise popped up, or in a discussion, something was mentioned, and you could hear whether the tone was contemptuous or neutral. And I just tried to comment as if I had nothing in mind, but just to slightly comment and push in a direction without being obvious, just so that they know me. And after I've been in this group for like 6 months, and it's populated by men above 40 that are academics of different sorts and stuff. And at one point I mentioned my podcast, just like, how can I introduce my ideas without being labeled automatically as the touchy-feely, whatever, not our thing, not academic, not evidence-based, bullshit, touchy-feely stuff. And I had to kind of establish a reputation of being well-read in the topics they were talking about. If I read books about very interesting stuff in social psychology, how to interact, how to move ideas, so that I could actually interact with them on their ideas and their levels, and then only very slowly introducing some of my points of view and asking the question, could it also be true that this is happening in the area of how we approach weight in our society, and just trying to, you know, engage them a little bit. And some of them actually ended up listening to my podcast, and one reached out to me. He's like 58. And he said, you know, I listened to your first episode and I'm almost afraid to listen to more, because I was once in a bigger body and I lost weight. And I am now competing races all over the country as a runner. Yeah. And it was wonderful to just hear, like, yes, I might have gone into a compulsive habit just to not gain the weight back. His whole profile is littered with pictures of him running races and, you know, the discipline he has. And I found this very, very interesting. And I had to establish a rapport within the group first before I could just enter in and say body positivity and fat acceptance. They would never have been open to any of my ideas. We have to really tread carefully, be open to how people talk, how they interact, and then, you know, not burst in the door with, you have to accept my point of view or else. Because this is not helping. Yeah. And it's a very delicate process. And yeah, it makes me feel very vulnerable. What if they reject everything? And then, you know what I mean? Just the human fears we have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is, because, as you said before, using Brené Brown's kind of metaphor of the arena, about 18 months ago, I deliberately stepped into the arena. I knew what I was doing and I did it deliberately. And I made decisions that supported the idea of really going public. And I felt so vulnerable doing that, but I did it deliberately. And that involved a huge amount of media. And then once you do that, once you put yourself in the eye of the media, it completely changes how you experience things in terms of stigma and discrimination and just out and out fat hate. And then you do have, what I've found is that people will be very receptive to my message. They find me easy to talk to and easy to listen to if I judge my audience well. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing, like when I did, say, the top radio program in Melbourne. So I went in there with a sense of humour and instead of a serious agenda. But I'm still selling fat acceptance. I really find that every single thing that I do, I judge my audience. So it would really piss me off if I had to bend too much particularly to very privileged groups of people, like, middle class white men, for example. I find them sometimes to be hugely supportive and other times to be, huge adversaries and to be really difficult. But I have had to rely on really thinking through who is the audience here while still staying true to the message. So that has been the balance, I think, of being true to myself and true to activism. The message is the same, but how I deliver it is sometimes different. And I use a lot of humor. And I think that that's something that I've developed in the arena as I've stepped into it, because I am that way anyway. I am kind of upfront and I can take a laugh and, lots of downward dog jokes on TV and stuff. But that's been okay with me because by and large, the media has treated me with quite a great deal of respect. It has been the general public who have not treated me with a great deal of respect. It's been your average person in the comments who've told me I'm not worthy to be a yoga teacher, for example. But mostly I feel like it's a happy story. It's a good story because the way that this book with it, they've made such a big deal in Australia about me calling this book Fat Yoga. They've just made such a huge deal. Every single journalist has asked me why would you do something like that? But in a kind of open way, and they've been open to the answers. And I reckon I've talked to several people around from their, beginning point of that's disgraceful to kind of really understanding where I was coming from. And I think that because I often get in my media about 7 minutes, that's really,
that's a lot. We used to give people, it declined. The airtime we gave people and our little broadcasts declined, all in the favor of more music, less content, content.
I think I've got really good at just talking more so that they have no choice but to kind of extend it.
How can we make the most of the time we are given that someone might be listening to us?
Look, I reach people with authenticity and humour, and that's how I've kind of used it to my advantage. Is that making sense?
Yes, it is. I'm a person that uses humor as well, but never self-deprecating humor and never in an appeasement sort of way, like, yeah, I know. Not like this, but there's a way we can, if someone is humorous, of course, it's a trait just like any other personality trait. But if it's something that comes naturally to us, then of course we should be engaging with it and in an open, present way, and not just with our own agenda. I'm going to push this message. I'm going to make the most of my time, because it's always the same. If someone doesn't feel heard, they will not listen. No one that doesn't feel heard will listen. So you can't just rush in and push your agenda. Then people will be defensive.
I think another thing that has really worked for me, which has also been incredibly difficult and made me very, very vulnerable, and also been an interesting experience for my family, is I've been excruciatingly honest in my experiences as a person. All the experiences that I've had with weight, with body, with eating disorders, with postnatal depression, with, all the stuff. I've had everything, everything that could possibly happen to a person has happened to me pretty much. And so I decided when I entered the arena that I would also be really honest about my own story. And it's really interesting because Fiona and I have very different styles, and she has skills that she draws on that she doesn't use her own personal stuff, and she engages people, and she's wonderful in that sense. And I am the opposite. So I think in that way, when we sit down and do videos together, it actually works well because we're very different. And I will always draw on the personal because that has shaped me so much. And it's very well processed stuff. Obviously, I'm a psychotherapist. I wouldn't be sharing things publicly that aren't very well processed. We wouldn't want to have an on-air breakdown. But I mean, I made the decision to be me. It's my voice. I admitted that, the first however many years I did yoga, they were talking about pranayama, which is beautiful breath practice, and it's an essential part of yoga. And I wrote in the book, which is the truth, that I had literally no idea what they were talking about for about 5 years. Like, I just didn't get it at all. So I've just been really honest about my own experiences and good, bad, all of this stuff. And that has helped me, I think. But it's also made me very vulnerable. But it's the part of the book that people have responded to. So I'm really touched very often by I get these letters or messages from people and they don't say, wow, you did a great job showing me how to access Trikonasana or something in an advanced pose. They say, thank you for telling your story because that happened to me too.
That's how we reach people.
The power of story. I mean, we've been sitting around campfires telling stories for thousands of years.
Exactly.
And if I can help by sharing my own story, which has been very colourful, and people have really responded to that I'm a real person and that I've been willing to say it all. Plus, I've been with you on all the diets. I've done the diets. I've done everything. I've had weight loss surgery and I was so ashamed of that.
So let's backpedal a little bit because we're rushing ahead. Normally, the whole structure of the interview is completely different. So now we're in the middle of it, and let's start at the beginning again and going into your own story. Because what I usually ask people is how they felt as a little kid. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, the very first thing I remember people saying to me was, oh, it was so funny because you basically popped out of your mum and you had the most enormous thighs and we all thought that was hilarious and you still have them. I mean, basically, that was the first story I remember about my body. And I was really, really young at that time. And they basically told me from as soon as I could hear or listen that I was fat and that my thighs were, particularly my thighs, I'm not sure why, that when they looked at me at a baby, they were like, oh my God, look at this little baby. She's got enormous thighs. And that was the first way that my body was explained to me. But they were extremely invested and highly valued thinness. And I was never thin. I was never a small person. I was never I'm just not that person. I never was that person. So I was placed on my first diet very, very young, 8 or something. And they required a special permission for me to go along to the church hall to Weight Watchers, which is a story that resonates with lots and lots of people. Mm. And from there, really, it was a constant parade of what my mom and my dad, who both were very invested in my size, my mom in a very kind of caring, gentle way, it was very foreign to her. She's a very small-bodied person. And she could see my distress. I wanted to be like all the other girls. And she was responding to that. But certainly I do sometimes reflect on if that hadn't been my journey, where would my body have been now? And then really basically for the next 20 years or so, maybe a bit less, I just pursued every single solitary thing that, was available. I ordered things off the internet, all the different pills and potions. And then I had weight loss surgery. And I had plastic surgery. I mean, the whole thing. My degree of body hate in my 20s was just unsurpassed. I had a raging eating disorder, which I hid from everybody. So nobody knew that I had that eating disorder. When I was found out, I kind of staged a fake recovery. I got people off my back that way, which was highly effective. Let's just say it was an awful, horrible, serious eating disorder, which I had for, more than 10 years and was a real struggle, but I did not tell anyone about it. So when I went to seek help, I still didn't ask for help in terms of I couldn't afford the treatment. So I went into a university trial And, you know, if it was out there, I mean, I had my breasts reduced. I had, you know, 2 rounds of surgery because the first lot of weight loss surgery failed. And, of course, because I was deep in diet culture, I believed that was my fault. And I lived with chronic pain from that
the
surgery. Yeah, for years. So years and years and years and years of chronic pain and vomiting. And I just thought that was what the price that I had to pay. And it didn't really even make me that much smaller, to be fair. But that was my punishment, you know, for living in a bigger body. And I never achieved a smaller body. You know, I did all of this stuff. You know, I was never much smaller than I am now. And that's kind of the mystery of the whole thing. But I hated myself with a degree of passion that it was almost unsurpassed. I mean, almost to the degree of passion that I have for not hating myself now. So, you know, it was really a big journey for me to reverse all of that and to come out the other side and realize that I had to embrace my body, you know. And I'm not a big fan of the term body love. My particular way of looking at it is body peace, body neutral, and body acceptance. I think we go up and we go down, and some days, and this really resonates with people too, you know, I'm a body image specialist and I talk lots about it and I work with lots of people about it, and because I do long-term group therapy, so, you know, group therapy with people for years, I know that these are things that don't necessarily go away. If you felt badly about yourself, about your body for 20 or 30 years, you may still have the odd day where you're going to feel body discomfort, or you're going to I call them bad body days. You know, you might still have one of those days, and that's fine. And I think with body love, and I blame Instagram a little, where we're kind of posing semi-naked with this kind of, you know, one arm seductively draped somewhere, because even in fat activism and body positivity, I believe that people are looking at that and thinking, if she's prepared to wear less clothes, she must love her body. But for me, it's not important, because I'm not interested in making it about the body anymore. One of the things that I love to say to people is the most interesting thing about me is not what I look like.
No, exactly. That's why I think we place too much value on the appearance of the body, and we confuse body love, or the concept of body love, of loving the appearance, instead of I love what it does for me.
Yeah, I mean, these arms, these hands, I mean, my God, I grew a human being, which just blows my mind. You know, the things that I can do with my body are great, but I don't want to diminish the experience of people who either don't have children or don't have the privilege that I have. You know, the body is still magnificent regardless of what it can and can't do. And I've completely dropped, there's a hashtag that people used to use, which was all bodies are good bodies. And I don't use that anymore because I feel like it's too privileged. All bodies for some people aren't good. You know, for some people really struggle with illness, seen and unseen, with disability, with all kinds of things. And so for them, their experience of the body is sometimes not good. So I've kind of moved away from that because I feel like it doesn't support my view and vision to move away from, you know, to acknowledge my privilege and not get involved in that as much.
I didn't understand it that way. For me, it was just saying that everybody is worthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a different interpretation. So I understand if someone doesn't feel happy in a body that has disabilities or chronic illnesses. But the need that I have is to tell them, you're just as a worthy human being as every other person.
Exactly.
Because so that they don't feel the shame of not being okay.
It's like the expression, you more than anyone else are worthy of love and respect. And I believe that everyone has a right to a degree of ease and comfort in their skin, no matter where or how or, you know, their experience. I really believe that you can come to have body peace. That's my really big belief. But sometimes it's a really hard journey for people, because people have contacted me when I did use that hashtag and said, you know, that's a really hard one for me because my body has not been good to me because of chronic illness or because of this or because of that or because of, you know, my inability to do something I want, like have a baby. I don't feel that all bodies are good bodies. I feel like, and so I want to change people's perception of that. You know, I want them to feel like their body is still amazing, but not because of what it looks like or even because of what it can do, but just because we all have inherent worth.
Yes, exactly. And I imagine for you, I mean, you really took the long way home to yourself, as it sounds like. Yeah, because of your surgeries and everything. I really feel with you. And I wonder, did you arrive at a point where it was just too much and you couldn't take it anymore? Because what it sounds like to me is that you tried, quote unquote, everything, including going under the scalpel, which is really a painful procedure, and you still didn't think that your body was working as you wanted it to, then there must have been a point of complete desperation.
I was desperate. I was desperate because I thought I wasn't worthy of love in the body that I had, do you know? And I felt like I wasn't worthy of really anything, that I wasn't worthy to do the things that I wanted to do or to be loved or to be brave or to write books or to be a yoga teacher or any of the things that I wanted to do. I didn't feel like I could do them in the body that I had. So I took every extreme measure that was available to me in a privileged Western culture to try and change that, and it did not work. And I ended up, I mean, obviously I've ended up with physical issues. The surgery has been undone in a sense. I was lucky enough to be able to do that, but one day it's going to cause me a physical problem. It won't go away. I mean, you can't just cut open your body and put a lap band around it and have no consequences later down the track. There will be a consequence for me at some point that I'll have to kind of look at. But
what are the consequences? I'm not aware of how this works.
Well, because I've had more than 7 or 8 abdominal surgeries for different things, I was not willing to have the lap band taken out of my body. I felt like I just can't have another abdominal surgery. There's so much scar tissue that when I went to get a mammogram recently, they're just like, we can't even see anything because of the... So I didn't have the lap band taken out. What I did was have it completely unfilled, which means I have no restriction. I can eat normally. But that foreign body inside me is either going to erode into my stomach, which will be bad, or there'll be some other complication, which will mean I'll need another surgery. But I just need to scrape together my my kind of ability to go in and have another abdominal surgery because I've had so many.
I think that is a really important topic also to talk about, because that's a point where people are usually not speaking up anymore because they're all quietly suffering. Like, what am I going to do? Oh my God, what is going to happen? Because it literally confronts us with the fear of dying. I mean, also for people who have had plastic surgery or breast implants, there's the question, how long can is this going to somehow, do I have to cut myself open again and remove that? And how is that going to look? Or can I just leave them in? Those are not questions that are openly talked about. And everybody kind of, tries to find a way because, and maybe risking their health. I have no idea about stuff like that. And usually the initial surgeon doesn't tell you.
Oh, they told me nothing. Do you know they just do you know what they said to me? They sat me down and they said, in this time next year, you'll be wearing the smallest bikini you've ever seen. And basically I just said, where is your pen? And I will sign. Yeah. And then of course the lap band slipped, which meant it was extremely painful. It went out of position in my stomach. And I felt like that was my fault because I was still mired in this self-hatred and this still way in diet culture. And so I let them do another surgery and replace it, thinking it was my body that had failed. And of course the pain was still the same when they replaced it, and the issues with it were still the same. The experience of weight loss surgery is awful. Like it was awful for me. I'm sure that there are people who have successful experiences. I don't know. But for me, it was the most invasive, painful, and shameful thing. So I told everyone, in inverted commas, came out about it, a few years ago, because I felt like, because it was a long time ago. I think I was one of the first people to have the lap band surgery, because I was literally reading medical journals looking for those types of surgeries. That's how kind of crazy I was at the time.
I understand your thinking, yeah.
Yeah, look, I was just desperate. I mean, the root of the story is that when I was about 9 or so, my grandmother took me to one side and said, you will never find love and no one will ever marry you because you're so fat. I kind of played that out and really believed her, and later found out really that she probably had anorexia herself. That makes sense now as an adult woman, but as a young person, an 8-year-old, and then as a teenager and young adult, I just didn't make sense of it that way. And I believed what she said, and I just lived my life according to her words. It just persisted into my life because everywhere around me, people were reinforcing that, They used to say to me again and again and again and again, and it's common, we hear it a lot, but Sarah, you've got such a pretty face. If only ... like if only you were thinner, you would have everything. So I call it the golden ticket. You sold this and I bought it, hook, line, sinker, literally everything. Mm-hmm. And I did not talk about it because I felt so much shame. I said to Fiona, at the very beginning of working with her when we started Body Positive Australia, I sat Fiona down and I said, I don't know if you're going to want to work with me after I've told you this. But I had the lap band surgery a few years ago. If you don't want to work with me, I really understand. I mean, that's the degree of shame I felt. I didn't think that she would want to work with someone that had ever been willing
for a decision that you made years back when, of course, you were.
I think that's just shame. I just felt as a clinician working in this field that I couldn't tell. I mean, I just couldn't say that. I could say that I had dieted and that I had been sucked in, but I couldn't say some of this stuff. And now I have a completely different attitude to it. I talk about it because I believe that people should know both sides of the story, not just the kind of, oh, how successful and wonderful and it'll change your life and, you'll save your life and all this stuff. I really believe they should know everything. It's, of course, a hugely liberating experience. And I haven't found anyone so far in the professional community that's been very critical of me, but I'm sure there's people that are still very surprised to read it in the book because that was the first time it really came out very publicly.
I think it's important that more people come out with stories how they really felt, because most of the articles and the stuff that comes out and the so-called research is funded by the very people that are, behind this whole weight loss surgery, the whole industry of that. And then people are misled to believe that it's a fairly okay surgery. And then after that, everything is sunshine and roses. And now that people are coming out of the woodwork, and I have the honor of having been invited into a few groups on Facebook just because I do the work that I do, and I get to read about people's experience, and it's horrifying. It's just as with every other surgery.
It's like there's this underbelly to this thing which is being sold to us as possibly the answer to this terrible, and I really don't like the O word, so I'm not going to say it, but this crisis that we're having, that there's this underbelly of truth that is not being told. I get to hear it because I have a lot of, as a psychotherapist, obviously not as a yoga teacher, but as a therapist, I'm seeing more and more people where those surgeries, and all of them, all the different kinds, have gone horribly wrong. And it's just countless stories now for me of people for whom they went into it being told that this was the answer to everything. And it has turned out to be so physically disabling. And some of the very basic things about it, they're really important things about these devices or about these surgeries. There are some things that just aren't being told. And it's not fair to the person that's spending a vast amount of money and having their physical body being cut into because they're so desperate. I mean, you have to reach a point of desperation to allow someone to engage in that kind of
same with
behavior.
Breast surgeries. There's so many women who, you know, when they're 18 or even 28, and all they wish for is...
I had my breast reduced. It's kind of a funny story, but my sister walked into the bathroom one time and she found me on the floor, and I had the scales, and then I had put one of my breasts on the scales because I was trying to weigh them so I could figure out how much weight I could lose if I got them cut off. It's funny. It's really sad at the same time. She was merciless. She's never let me forget that. I mean, obviously it was a very funny moment for her, and except that I went on to then have them reduced and was really proud of the weight that I was able to take off my body by doing that. But
I heard for some women it's important to, or they say it was important to reduce them for back issues. So there's not just...
there's lots of very valid and real reasons. And I see this a lot in yoga too, where I see people like they're really struggling with the weight of the front of their body in that way. And I think that I don't see the breast reduction surgery in the same way that I see the
augmentation.
Yeah, I don't see it in the same way. But I did not do it for those reasons. I did it because of diet culture, because I thought I could lose it.
Where was this breaking point when you realized that's it?
It's very interesting because for me, really, it was a decision to recover from the eating disorder that set everything in motion. So it wasn't a light bulb, I'm going to reject diet culture moment. It was a light bulb, I can't live like this anymore. I can't be sick and tired for the rest of my life. And I had a totally different life. So I used to work for Giorgio Armani, and I was on and off planes. You know, I used to live in New York 6 weeks a year to do the collections. And I had a really very different life that was very focused on appearance. It was considered a work appointment for me to go and get my eyebrows waxed. You know, there was a high degree of on what I looked like, but I was very, very unwell. And at one point in that job, what actually happened was I saw a photo of myself as an 8-year-old, you know, that 8-year-old who had been told she wasn't good enough and that she needed to go and diet.
Yeah.
I saw a photo of that girl, and I just looked at that photo and I thought, that kid there's nothing wrong with that kid. What was all the fuss about? And it really deeply upset me and deeply touched me. So I took the day off work and I contacted the Eating Disorder Foundation in my state. And I rang them, and I thought, I'm nowhere near thin enough to deserve treatment, and they're not going to, you know, they're going to tell me to go get lost. That, I guess, was the turning point. And once I started to recover, I kind of hit the jackpot in some ways because, you know, in my inability to ask for help, which I've since changed, by the way. I ask people for help all the time now. I got assigned a Melbourne doctor who turned out to be Dr. Rick Korsman, who's written a book called If Not Dieting, Then What?, who is the Australian pioneer of the non-diet movement and one of the early pioneers of the HAES movement. And that was like hitting gold, really, because he was the only person in Australia who was practicing non-diet and HAES at that time. And we're talking 20 odd years ago. So I walked into his office and heard things that I had never heard before. You know, you don't need to diet again. You know, you can't, in fact, because you put your recovery in jeopardy, and you can have a relationship with food that is calm and peaceful.
What did you think?
I was in part relieved and in part deeply in grief, because it meant I had to give up the idea. I still thought I wasn't lovable, and I had to give up the idea that I was going to have this perfect body which would unlock the perfect life.
Yes.
So it was a light bulb moment in some ways, and then a long amount of work in others. But it was really Rick Korsman's work that started me on understanding what HAES and non-diet was and what that would mean to me personally, which was complete liberation and freedom from the tyranny, I guess, and the prison of numbers that I had put myself in and had lived in for so long. I made a decision at that point that I was going to quit my extremely glamorous job, sell my apartment, move back in with my parents, all the fun stuff and go back to university. And if, I just kept repeating it to myself, if I can stop, one person from going through what I went through, then that will be enough for me. And that is when I retrained. And that is when I decided that that's what I would do. I would treat people with body image and eating disorder issues. And that's what I've done. I really only see people with body and eating issues, and I have done for 15 years, and it's been my privilege, really. But that's when I decided to do that, and that's what kind of set things in motion.
It's astonishing how in therapy, body image issues are usually not addressed. For me, it took 15 years or more. And in those first 15 years, I talked about everything from my mother and all my traumas and my failures and my low self-esteem and my misery, my depression, my anxiety, but never about the way I ate, the way I felt about my body, what I did in order to be perceived the way that I was at the time and as a media personality and everything. It never came up. And so just as you, I thought I have to do this in order to pretend that I'm a normal person, to be able to play with the others. And I never thought that others might be struggling just as much as I did. And it was just me and kind of in this silent desperation that I just had to do what I did in order to be accepted here. I wonder now, why doesn't this come up in every therapy, just as a usual, normal question? How do you feel about your body? Yeah, I don't know. People have told me that it's often that the therapists themselves have their weight bias. I don't know.
Look, I think people come and see me because of my body, and I think they don't see me because of my body. I think the therapist's body in therapy is a very interesting thing. I think for some people, I particularly notice people with orthorexia type presentations really struggle with me. They really, really struggle to work with a therapist of my size. I see it and I talk about it and we kind of bring it into the light. It actually just doesn't work for them.
Even though they're suffering from their obsession with their healthy food plan. Interesting.
They really struggle with me, and yet people with eating disorders of other eating disorders don't struggle. It's not like I only see larger bodied people. That's not true. I see all bodied people, but I notice particularly people with orthorexia type presentations really struggle with my body. I can feel them looking at my body with this quite intense. As a therapist, you get used to how you're observed, and I notice that and just tuck it away. But
their bias that you're not eating healthy.
Yeah. They really struggle to take, I guess, what they perceive as health advice in some ways from someone in my size body. They're like, no.
Yeah.
And they walk generally.
It's the bias.
And that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I can't change everyone. Some of them I can convert, but others I can't. And I had the same experience as you. I went to, just after the eating disorder, when I was well from the eating disorder, but still not well from the body image, I went to a specialist, an eating disorder specialist, who supposedly was a body specialist too. And I said to her, this is how I feel about my body, and this is how I feel about fat and the fatness and fat on my body and all this stuff. And she basically sent me away. She's like, no, you're fine. You don't have an eating disorder anymore. So off you go, young woman. Mm-hmm. And so nobody would help me with it. I felt like I tried, the best person that was identified to me. So basically kind of healed my own, I got help with the eating disorder, but I healed my own body image, which is probably the long way around.
How did you do it? Because that might be the one question that everybody wants to know.
I mean, I'm just in the final stages of putting together Body Peace, which is really nearly a book now, which is how I believe what both worked for me and how I perceive work with the people that I work with, because I see yoga as a big part of that, but not just yoga, but the mindfulness components of yoga. And so there are many things that healed me, that brought me body peace. But also think mindfulness-based therapy is like ACT and Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion, you know, so many different things for me come into this beautiful, I call it a map, you know, they make this beautiful map of body peace, and you use all these different components to arrive at a sense of peace and ease in your body. My strong conviction at this point is that you can't work on the body while ignoring the body. So that you can't just work from the shoulders up and sit in a therapy chair and talk about the body. You really need a somatic component. You need to learn how to feel embodied via some kind of embodiment work. So I now mix the two things together because I think it's vital. It's not that popular, my opinion. It's moving towards it. There are certainly people that do this work, but I can't understand why it's not, you know, in trauma, we have trauma-sensitive yoga, but in eating disorders, we have nothing. You know, I work in an eating disorder unit at a hospital, and there was nothing. I couldn't find really anything about that. And I think that if you're going to heal the body, you just can't just use talking therapy.
The specialists I talked to for this podcast would probably agree with you, and they said similar things.
Yeah. Sort of like it's not organized, and wonderful people do it for anxiety and depression. Amy Weintraub, Bo Forbes. There are people that are doing, you know, lots of great work, but the real research, the bulk of the research sits in trauma and not in eating disorders. And it is quite difficult to get eating disorder programs to really take a yoga component seriously. Sometimes they throw it in as like, oh, yoga will be good, so we'll throw it into our program, but they don't do it in a way that I consider meaningful. So they'll say, oh, yes, our eating disorder program has a yoga. But what I am trying to do is, I'm going to use a word from neuroscience, which is interoception, which is in interoception is the ability to feel into the body, not just practicing yoga because, you know, we throw yoga on our program alongside music therapy and whatever, but really understanding body sensing and the feelings and sensations in the body and getting calm and comfy with those sensations.
And I think we also have a huge misconception about yoga here in the West, especially for the yogi sort of communities. They're often more into the power yoga sort of stuff and not really. I think this might be a misconception, but I think that yoga is often misused and used in a quote unquote cool kids way and not really in a healing way. And you recently wrote an article for the Yogi Times, I think. You called them out on their biases in relation to obesity and stigma, and you called them out for their headless fatty picture and that the way they talked about obesity and shaming people. And I really loved this article because that's exactly what holds people back from, you know, going to a yoga class because they feel too fat, or people are shamed at the gym. So when they not go, they're lazy. And when they go, they're not welcome there. So what the hell? This is such hypocrisy, you know?
It's awful. And look, they have a big reach. They have like 1 million Facebook followers. And I felt like, no, you can't get away with publishing this stuff because it is so deeply untrue and so deeply harmful to perpetuate this in the yoga community and for people to read this and think that this is true. So I deliberately put the picture that they use, which was the headless fatty, and then I put a picture of me underneath it just to kind of illustrate to people like what the difference is, what it actually physically looks like when the difference between an actual person, you know, with my little smiley face and their headless fatty. You know, when you personalize it, you can't discriminate and hate in the same way. And I just really wanted them to understand that. I have had no response from my, you know, ranting. But you know, I feel like they and all of the yoga press have an obligation to not only show the yoga body as one kind of body. And that is changing. There are lots of us now. I mean, I say lots, there's 10. But there's lots of us now that are really pushing the envelope in terms of the yoga body. Mm-hmm. And super excited to do some more work next year with some more people.
some of those blanket statements they made, which I think is good to just raise the awareness of how this might seep into our subconscious if we just read and take this in without really thinking about it. I mean, what they say is stuff like shaming people in bigger bodies for not fitting into a friend's sports car would motivate them to slim down, or, quote, being obese can add up to many costs and some of them can be quite unexpected. People who are overweight spend thousands of dollars every year because of their weight. And you just kind of read over it until you go, wait, what? And maybe on diet programs or surgeries or pills? What do you mean? I know so many people who are actually healthy in a bigger body. And me, myself, and this might be a bias, but I was very sick when I was very thin. So
I recently also have the privilege of lecturing at university to dietetic students. Recently, like last week, I gave them a little lecture. We were talking to them a little bit about the culture we live in, and I showed them a picture of the model Tess Holiday. Yes. So I asked them what they felt when they saw images of Tess, and they all were extremely vocal and quite biased and upset by those photographs. And I'm like, okay, so why? And they're like, she is so unhealthy. And I'm like, so you're looking at a picture. What in goodness name gives you the ability to tell me that you can judge someone's health just by looking at them? They've been so conditioned in their course that fat is bad. And that the really interesting emotion I find, and I find this across the board when I talk to people about it, about health at every size or bigger bodies being healthy, they were angry. They're so invested in fat is bad that they were actually really angry. And I find that a lot when I get into conversations with people, either in dinner parties or randomly or online or wherever. Again, I don't go in too hard too often, but then I'm surprised that the predominant thing is anger. But what about our tax dollars? But what about the poor children? They're very angry. And I am still to really completely unpack why fat people make other people feel angry. It's an emotion that I come across, quite a lot, and it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, we must ask, why does this make you angry? Or where did you get the belief? Who told you that this was true? Because we're all kind of hardwired to look for confirmation bias. So if I hold a belief that, I don't know, cool people drive red cars, then I will find cool people that, wow, coincidentally drive red cars. And I will not be really open to see how many cool people drive whatever color cars. So we all look for the confirmation of our perceived truths. And we're usually not really open to someone telling us the opposite because we don't like the cognitive dissonance that creates. So we need to be asked, okay, why do you hold this belief? Like, yeah, I know that because someone told me this, and I know all my friends drive red cars, and it might be a bit of a stupid example, but we can dig into our own head and talk to someone who asks us why or when did we pick up this belief, and then as we talk about it, we might find, yes, I do hold this belief because of this. And then if someone kindly digs a little deeper and asks us question, how could the opposite be true? And they must think about, how could this be true? Is there an example for the opposite to also maybe actually be true? And then we might soften a little bit. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it really depends on how we approach someone. Because if you just go in and say, hey, people in blue cars are the cooler people, then what ends up happening is just two different parties fighting each other.
Well, that's right. But look, what I find is I need time, and I also need calmness to do that, because if I get frustrated with whoever's giving me their hate spiel, then it doesn't help. In a therapeutic setting, that's what we do. We dismantle it. So, and I often like to ask people, whose voice is that? Whose voice is it that is saying that to you? Where did you learn that? When's the first time you remember? I'm going to bit like your early question. Who taught you that? Where did it come from? And I break it down for them when we look at the past and the present and the future. because I like to go deep. I'm not really just interested in the shallow work. I really want to dive down and really understand where stuff comes from people, which you can do in therapy, but we often can't do in casual conversation, or when you've got 100 dietetic students looking at you like you're the devil, which has happened to me, and trying to get around their bias. So what I did actually in that situation was I gave them all a bias test, the one on Yukon from the Right Obesity Centre, which is available to anybody who wants to play around with that. It's really, really interesting. I don't know if you have done it. It just kind of teases out very, very quickly our own internal bias. And of course, I've done it and it shows I'm biased. I know that Linda Bacon has also done it and she's as biased as me. And what all it's showing us is our level of internalized bias that we have from just living in this culture. And so that's really helpful for students, because you really, really quickly you can get them to understand that just from being in this culture doesn't have to be your value. You don't have to live like that fat is bad and thin is good. That is not how you have to live. But the internalized bias testing is really interesting in terms of showing young clinicians and young students that they carry this bias, and so they need to understand it in order to move forward and work safely and well in the clinical work that they're going to do in the future. And I feel like that's my responsibility to point that out to them.
Yes, and I just want to say that I didn't mean that we all should engage everyone in long conversations about their biases and finding out, and non-defensive and all calm. This is not possible, of course, but that there is a way. If someone wants to engage, then there is a way. But as you said, we need to be calm ourselves, because if we're not, we're reacting automatically and we will be defensive just as the other person will be. So, and it can be unnerving to see someone, defending their points that are not making sense. So I was just saying that there are ways of unpacking this, and that I just want to mention them so that if someone is interested, it's like someone recently told me about epistemology, and that is a term that I think is often used in, with religious beliefs, digging into people's religious beliefs, why they hold on to them so stiffly and why they defend their own beliefs, while the person next to them is just as defending of their belief, which might be completely different. And so that was interesting to me. I didn't really even know what epistemology was. So I went into that from a totally different area of topics. But I learned a lot in the way of how we can approach someone without being offensive or demeaning or trying to make them wrong, but just if someone is ready, what they usually do is they ask people on the street, do you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes? And they coming from a neutral, relatively neutral point of view, and just ask people interesting questions that dig deeper and deeper and deeper, with the idea that they might plant a seed of doubt for the person who has held on to a belief so strongly, and they give them the opportunity to come back to them if they want to talk about what is happening to them after their conversation. But it's completely non-aggressive, and it's very interesting how people defend themselves. And you see then some people go, I don't really know. Now that I don't know, I've never thought about it. Or they're being asked to defend the person next to them who is maybe holding on to a different belief, and they end up coming up with the same arguments, and then suddenly their own point isn't 100% sure anymore. So it's interesting, but we can only do it if we're not in an attack mode.
Yeah, and do you know what's something really interesting that, I have had the experience that I don't know if everyone has had this experience, is sometimes I notice what happens if Fiona gets up in front of those students and says something and she's in a small body versus what happens if I get up and say exactly the same thing. The visual is actually very interesting, the visual response of people to someone giving the haze message, the non-diet message, the anti-diet culture message in a small body, versus sometimes these are the people that are very resistant, can have like a very different response to how she will speak versus how I might speak. if that makes any sense. I mean, it's neither good nor bad. I mean, it's a shame in some ways that they'll hear my message a little differently. And it kind of used to hurt my feelings a bit, but it doesn't anymore, because I've just come to realize that, you know, people are so entrenched in what they have learned, what they have learned to be true about bodies and about fat, that it's hard sometimes for them to get past my fat body and hear my message. So the more that I can talk articulately and remain calm and be persuasive in my own way, the better it is, because I've got to get past the initial barrier of the physical, what physically people see. Because sometimes what they say to me is, you're just making excuses because you're fat.
Yes, but you might be forgetting that you might have more appeal for people in bigger bodies, because they might oppose Fiona, because they say, it's easy for you to say that fat is not bad. You should be living in a body like this, and you have no idea how it is. So they might be listening to you, that it's possible to go all of the challenges that you went through and end up in a position where you can say, look at me. I'm happy. I'm fat. I'm doing yoga. This is all happening. Life can happen.
No. Well, I mean, I've run this course called The Clinician's Body, and that's the stuff we talk about. You know, sometimes people respond better to me because they think my lived experience is closer to theirs, and sometimes they'll respond better to Fiona because they think they want to end up with a body like hers. And so we can't be in therapy. We can't be therapists, or we can't be activists and completely separate ourselves from our bodies. Like it exists, it's there. I'm really blessed to work with someone that has all of that knowledge and has all of that skill, and we're very different, so we offer very different things. And she's also kind of small too. Like when she stands next to me, she's kind of like I'm a lot taller than she is, so there's a physical difference between us too when we go and do stuff together. But what I find is maybe 1 or 2 or 3 weeks into group therapy, the people that work with us don't even notice. Like it's not for them at all. They might notice in the first week. It might be something that they kind of clock in the first week or have feelings about in the first few weeks. But after that, we just become humans. We've just become humans who are helping them with the message that they really need, and healing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yes, it is. Do you have a positive feeling when you look into the future?
I do, because I've been giving the body image lecture at the university here for about 8 years. And so I have watched the landscape. Every year I sit down and pull it together, what's happening in the landscape. And I think there is real change. Really, there is change. And also, I don't even think 12 months ago you would have had a Target or a Kmart put a book like mine in their stores, and I don't think it would have been a mainstream book. And it's been marketed and sold. And I had a publicist and I had a book tour, and those things would not have happened 12 months ago. And I think that just reflects the fact that we are changing, and we are becoming more accepting, and we are becoming more open. And I mean, maybe they're funny examples to use about myself, but I just don't think this would have happened even 12 months ago. So I really feel like things have changed and things are changing.
I think it's still the stage of where the poles get more extreme.
Yeah.
As in, there is ever more people falling into the trap of orthorexia and being obsessed with healthy eating. Yeah. There's more and more compulsive exercisers and people getting praise for ruining their body in insane races or competitions or very punishing workout routines that are wreaking havoc with a woman's body over time. And at the same time, I see that the other side is coming out of the woodwork and speaking up. And I think those two are not really communicating with each other yet, but I think as more extreme as the diet culture gets and the more confusing and conflicting messages there are, the more people say, screw that, I'm done. How can I find peace now?
Yeah. And even people like yourself, you have a huge impact on people, and you have a reach and an ability to talk to people in a way that it really is resonant and creates change. And I think it's really, really important. And I do feel really hopeful. I mean, I think it's sad that we've got possibly a new eating disorder to classify. in the wonderful DSM, but it is getting better because the message is getting through that there's an alternative. And I think prior to now, it wasn't mainstream that there was another way to do it. I think if I'd been born 20, 30 years later, I don't think I would have done to my body what I did to my body, because I think I would have seen amazing fat activists who were also incredibly fashionable. I would have seen them, and there was no visibility when I was young. I saw nobody that looked like me ever. Obviously Instagram wasn't invented, but I never saw in a magazine or in a media or anybody doing anything that had a body like mine. And now young women have at least a small chance to see people that look like them.
If they're willing.
You know,
sometimes their feeds are curated to the very opposite. So they have their echo chambers again.
Yeah, but then I get to them and tell them they have to go on a media diet and kind of we sit down and we go through it all. But, I think it's really important in terms of the brain, for the brain to see different images, to encourage the brain to understand and process diversity, because otherwise we can't, otherwise it doesn't happen. There's some things that aren't great, obviously, because it's my life's work to dismantle it. I feel like it's getting better. Good. Definitely.
If there is something you would like a person in a bigger body to know about yoga and whether or not they should or shouldn't participate in a yoga class, what would be your message?
Okay, this is the absolute truth about yoga. Yoga is the most beautiful, most accepting, and most accessible practice that exists in the world. It's so ancient. It's 4,000 years old, and it has something to offer every single body. It doesn't matter your level of ability. It doesn't matter your level of flexibility. The thing about yoga is there is something there for you, and literally any kind of body can access yoga and come to really relish and enjoy and love the complexity of this practice, which just has so much to offer.
And there are safe spaces, maybe not in real life for everybody, but certainly there are YouTube channels and stuff that we can do online. So
I'm just about to launch Body Peace, which is the two things together, yoga and body image. And I'm also just about to put up 3 different yoga classes so that people can access some of that stuff. Wonderful. But there are wonderful people out there that have those beautiful channels, and Diane Bondi is one and Anna Castelli is another. And they're just some wonderful people that have that stuff accessible. So, you can find there.
Definitely. So how can people find you?
You can find me in a number of different ways. So on Instagram, I'm Body Positive Yoga. If you want to work with me, I am at fatyoga.com.au or bodypositiveaustralia.com.au. I'm also open to people emailing me. So if you want to email me, you will be able to do that through the website. It'll be me that answers that stuff. So yeah, please, I'd love to hear from anyone. And the online stuff is coming, which is wonderful, which makes it more accessible.
Great.
In the book.
Yes, in the book, of course. I will link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon now, which is wonderful for the international people. I think it's possibly the least expensive on Amazon at the moment.
And the final question to you is, what would you like to be remembered for?
I think my authenticity and my vulnerability, maybe.
And your smile.
And my ability, absolutely no problem. Yes, and my smile and my, and just my enthusiasm for this work and for change.
Yeah, I've hardly ever spoken to someone that bubbly. How refreshing.
Yeah, I'm super passionate about this stuff, and it's really lovely to speak to someone that understands, what I'm talking about and shares my vision as well.
So thank you so much for taking your time. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.